Now I want to introduce our guest speaker for today, Stephanie Drzal. And Stephanie is a nutrient management specialist with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. But the reason she's here speaking to us today is because she's a recent graduate of NC State, earning a master's degree in soil science. And when we were planning this year's Plants, Pests, and Pathogen series, one of the suggestions we had received was soils. Soils would be a good topic. So I contacted Deanna Osmond, who is in soil science. She's the department extension leader, and asked her who she would recommend as a speaker. And she recommended Stephanie because as part of Stephanie's master's degree, she developed training resources for the Virginia Extension Master Gardener Program. And she loves speaking to master gardeners and loves talking about soils. So we're so glad to have her here today. And with that, Stephanie, I'm going to turn it over to you and say welcome and thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me? Am I coming through good and clear?
It's clear, but it's not very loud. So I don't know if you can move the speaker closer to your...
I will try and project really well then. I am super excited to be here today and just wanted to say if there are any questions, throw them up on the chat over there. I'll try and keep an eye on them. I don't want to reserve them for the end because I know a lot of times I forget what I want to say halfway through presentation. So please keep this an open dialogue. Any questions, anything doesn't make sense, just give a shout. And I'm going to talk today about whether you have a loam or not a loam or the myriad of things in between. I really enjoyed seeing where everyone was from. And like Charlotte said, it was a good scatter plot of kind of everything that we'll see in the state. So moving on, I always have this for my soils presentation and say, I hope you all brought your bicycle helmets because we're going to go through a crash course in soils today. We're definitely not going to cover everything there is to know about what's going on in your garden, but I hope this will be a good resource for you to help start figuring out and branch out from there. I have got a list of places that I really like to visit that I find really helpful at the end of this presentation. So starting with that, I kind of have this down modified to the 3 steps that I've found most helpful to understanding your soil. And that starts out with know what kind of soil you're dealing with. And everyone here, I'm guessing, will know whether they're dealing mostly with a sand, a clay, a loam, something in between. You have that kind of general idea, but we want to get to know your soil a little more personally than that. After you know your soil type, we're going to test for the needs of the soil. And finally, with those 2 things combined, we can start to augment your soil to help you get the best crop that you need. Understand that when I say augment your soil, you can change it a little bit, but you can't magically make a sand into a clay or vice versa. Your soil is what it is, and there are things that we can do to help mitigate any problems, but you'll still have those major problems that could potentially make you change potentially garden plans. So soil alchemy doesn't exist yet. It's the only way it really does that you can control it is if you put in raised beds, but with raised beds comes some of your own problems with that. So we'll touch on those a little bit as well. All right, so step 1, know your soil. We're talking about different properties of soil. And the first one is the physical stuff, the things that you can see and touch, and even if you're a little crazy like some soil scientists I've known, lick your soil to find out how sandy it is. Now, I'm not saying go out and lick your soil, but hey, if you want to, you know, no judgment here. And this is followed by your chemical properties, and that's your pH and mainly your cation exchange capacity. Those are the 2 things that I found are very important when it comes to helping understand your soil, and you can find those out generally through your soil test. All right, so we're going to start with our physical properties. The first thing that you really see when you look at your soil is the color. Now, soil color doesn't affect your plant growth, but it's an indicator of what can happen. So these are just very broad-based, scattershot, overall stereotypes of soil. And you might have a really black soil that's really sandy. But what I'm saying here is this can give you an idea of what you're dealing with when you look at it. So you have your black soil, and this is generally higher organic matter, 4% or more. This is where you have your really good black soil. And we have a lot here in Virginia, down by the coast, where a lot of the wetlands got drained back in the 40s and 50s. So you've got these really great high organic matter soils in an area that's a little discombobulating at first. So you have some of those down in North Carolina as well by the coastal plains. But you can also get that forested areas, anywhere that's got a lot of organic matter building up. For a basic brown soil, I mean, this is kind of your everything soil. It's what most people think of when they think of soil. A healthy brown color that you can kind of see up here is what I'm talking about when I say this brown color. It's a good organic matter content, but it's well drained enough that it doesn't get too much water in it. You see this a lot in cultivated areas that have had a lot of farming, but also maintain good cover at the same time. You can also see it in grasslands, pastures, that type of situation. Now your red soil, and this is this profile over here, this is actually your state soil, Cecil. It tends to be a bit redder due to lower organic matter, and it's pretty well drained. It's a bit on the sandier side. The red is due to the presence of iron. Mostly you'll see this in the Piedmont area where the tobacco land is. I remember when we drove down from Virginia to Raleigh for graduation a couple weekends ago, pretty much right over that state border, it clicked over into that bright red soil, and my boyfriend and I were pretty jealous that we don't have anything that looks so good up here. So continuing on with the soil colors, if you see a gray soil, and that's kind of this profile over here, this generally means that you have lower organic matter, it's poorly drained, you're going to have potentially standing water issues or really heavy clay land. The gray color is due to excessive water. And when I say excessive, there's definitely definitions out there about how many months of the year or weeks of the year that requires it. But if you see standing water frequently after rainstorms, you might have something that looks like that. Yellow soils, let's think about the coastal plains, the beaches, that type of thing. They tend to be bleached of all organic matter and nutrients. Sands don't really hold a whole lot of things. That's actually the kind of soil I have to garden with daily. So trust me, it's a struggle to keep it wet and keep it fertilized well. So anyone who lives in the coastal plains, I definitely sympathize with you there. Now modeling, this kind of goes hand in hand with the gray here, as you can see. This is what happens a lot of times when things are really, really wet and then they drain. It'll start to concentrate nutrients. You'll see a lot of these in floodplains or areas that have kind of ephemeral stream flow through them. All right, so you look at your soil and you say, I kind of have a little bit of yellow, maybe some of that beautiful Cecil elsewhere, but what does that really tell me? And we can kind of tie that together with soil structure. Now, soil structure, that's what I'm saying. When you grab your little trowel and you dig out a piece of soil, what comes up when you hold that in your hand? And what we call structure is how the soil is held together, mostly by organic matter and other forces. That's water. The more worms you have in, the more structured your soil is going to be, because what worms excrete is a really great glue, essentially, and that'll help glue your soils together. These little groupings down here, these are called aggregates or PEDs. This is about as small as you can get in soils and still really call it a soil. The strength and shape of these really influence a lot of what's going to happen in your soil. If you have something that's like this, we call this blocky, that means it's going to hold water a lot better because things aren't going to fall through the cracks so easily. You can see that those are pretty well structured together. The sandier soils you get, the bigger your pores are going to get, the more water that can drain through. So just knowing your general structure will also help you with your rooting. If you have really tight clays, you might have a problem getting your roots down there enough. So this next slide here is a little very brief overview of the different kinds of structures to expect. Now this granular stuff, this is kind of what everyone aims for in gardening. It's mostly what you see after cultivation. You have enough pore space that you can get roots and water and nutrients through it, but not so much that it just blows all right through and you end up with everything down here and not up here where you want it for your roots. It doesn't get as compacted. Now this blocky stuff, this is a lot of what you see when you have clay problems. They tend to fuse together and it might make it a little more difficult to break that up. Prismatic, this tends to happen in the subsoil, and so when I'm saying subsoil, you have your A horizon, which is on the top, which is mainly what we as gardeners focus on, and then you have your Bs, which are your subsoils, and they're below. They tend to have much higher clay content than your A's, so you'll get these chunks. And if you ever have seen a soil pit, you can dig these out, and you just scrape your trowel down the edge, and these huge blocks will fall out. Now, the one thing that you really should look for are these thin, platy ones. This could be a sign of compaction. If you have been somewhere that's been, used to have a lot of traffic on it, anything like that, something that you might have driven over, you could get this where the soil just starts to press together. Excuse me. And you definitely can have water flow issues with this. And we'll talk about how to break this up a little bit in the future. And then finally, you have your single grain stuff over here, which is my trials and tribulations of my gardening. Sands, definitely really hard to hold water into. And we'll talk about the better ways to deal with sands and your blocky structure problems. Excuse me, my allergies are going crazy down here with all this humidity. All right, so you have your color and you have your structure, and this leads us into a texture discussion. And texture is the distribution of your sands, your silts, and your clays in your soil. So I have it broken down here. Sands are basically your really big particles. That's this thing out here. You can see them with your naked eye. You don't need to whip out your microscope for that type of thing. Generally 2 to 0.005 millimeters, and they're gritty. If you pick up sand, you're going to feel like you can exfoliate something with it. Your silts, that's the smaller particle here, they're flowery. I always describe a silt as if you've ever waded into a river and you kind of feel that powdery texture that floats up around your feet. That's going to be a silty texture of a soil, and that's pretty much the medium. And then you've got your clays, which you can't see with your naked eyeball. You definitely need to get a microscope to see these little ones out here. And this is just blown up for, like cereal boxes so you can see the texture of the cereal there. They're anything smaller than 0.002 millimeters, and they're sticky. If you can throw pottery, that's a clay. You can have modifiers with each of these, and I'm not going to get into this too much, but you can have a finer sand, which is kind of on the silty side, or a mucky loam, but it's basically just further describing what type of soil you have. And then anything bigger than 2 millimeters, that's when you get into your coarse fragments. And you'll see that a lot more potentially in the mountains or anywhere that has a rockier soil. Glacial marine tills, which I don't think there are too many in this region, but I know Maine has quite a bit of those. They have a ton of coarse fragments just kind of all over the place because the glaciers ripped everything up. It's an interesting soil to look at. So your soil textures here will really influence what happens in your garden. Your sandy soils, these are the largest particles, but they have the smallest surface area. And this blew my mind for a while to figure out in soils what it means, how you can be the biggest and smallest at the same time. They drain easily, but they have a really, really poor ability to retain moisture. I mean, terrible. I can have a 4-inch rainstorm at my house, and the next day, if it's 90, I might need to be watering something. Little chemical activity, which means there's not a lot of nutrients binding to those particles. Your silts are basically like a sand, just broken down a little bit more. They're larger particles, still have little chemical activity, and they can compact a lot easier than sandy soils because they're smaller and they press together more. So they've got kind of the worst of both traits sometimes going in there with just silts. Then clays, I always say imagine a clay as an accordion. You press it up really tight so that's really, really small, but if you extend it, it has all these layers. So that makes clay, have the smallest particle size and the largest surface area, which just took me years to figure out what the heck a professor was saying by that. So because they have all these surface areas kind of smushed up into a little bit of space, they have these little jagged edges, if you can imagine that, that stick out, that allow water and other chemicals to adhere to those little bits and pieces of the accordion that are stuck up together. So that makes them very chemically active. So they're good for nutrient bonding and water retention. But because they're so small, they can pack really, really easily. Most soils aren't just straight sand, silt, or clay. They're a combination thereof. Hardly any clays that you can do anything with are more than 30 or 40% clay. If you get any significant amount of clay in there, you know it really fast. And this is the good old textural triangle. It's every soil scientist's kind of go-to idea of what you're working with. And so, like I was saying, if you have any little bit of clay, your soil will be considered a clay. Most gardens that, if we all had everything perfect, a medium loam would be where you're at, because you have the nutrient bonding of clay, but the particle distribution and pore size of the sand, So you'll look at this and you'll see these say sandy loams and loamy sands. So what's the difference between these two? This is the sand down here is what the main soil type is, but this is the modifier to it. This loamy is saying the sandy, it's a sand, but it's got loamy tendencies. Now this loam, it's a loam, but it's got sandy tendencies. So this loam would feel grittier, and this silty loam would feel more powdery, more that flowery feel. So that'll kind of give you a really fast overview of what your soil is just by feeling it, by grabbing a handful of it. And there are a lot of great exercises out. If you ever just Google anything about texturing your own soil, you can make ribbons, you can put water and soil in a mason jar with a little bit of dish detergent soap and shake it up, and then you can measure your different particle sizes. There's tons of great stuff out there. So if you have any kids or grandkids and ever want to do that, it's really fun and a great way to talk about soil. I have this little figure on here that just kind of breaks down this textural triangle into what you can expect to feel. So if you have something that feels gritty and doesn't ribbon, and when I say ribbon, I mean if you have a small piece of soil in your hand and you spritz it a little bit to get it moist but not sopping wet, and you can rub it into kind of like a Play-Doh ribbon, that's what I'm talking about when I say ribboning. So if it doesn't do any of that and it feels gritty, you've got your sand or your loamy sands, which is what I work with. Basically, I pick up my soil and it falls into little bitty pieces. Your sandy loams, they're going to feel gritty but leave this smear, and it might ribbon, but it'll be under an inch and it'll kind of break into small pieces. For your silts and your loams, it'll feel smooth and flowery, and again, it won't ribbon so much, and it'll break down. Whenever you start to ribbon it, it might break at an inch or a half an inch. Now, the more clay you get, the more ribbon you're going to get. It's saying 3/4 of an inch here. The more clay you get, when you have your sandy clays, your silty clays, and your clay clays, you're going to get at least 2 inches. The only way you can tell really that it's sandy versus silty, does it feel flowery versus gritty. So kind of a really fast overview on how you can go out in your backyard this afternoon. Well, hopefully not this afternoon because I know it's smoking hot up here, but this evening, maybe when the sun goes down, and grab a handful of your soil and kind of just get a really basic feel. And anyone who works in their gardens enough can probably off the top of your head just tell me what you have out there. I mean, it's working with it, you tend to know what things are going on. So now we're moving from our physical properties to the chemical properties that I find most important in dealing with gardens. And the first is pH. If you don't know what your pH is, you can really be hurting your plants. So pH is a measure of hydrogen ions in the soil. Acidic means a pH of less than 7. Neutral is 7, and alkaline is anything greater than 7. Most of what you all are going to deal with is acidic here. And there are definitely pros and cons to that. We will touch a little bit about how having raised beds can potentially increase your ability for alkaline soils. And that has a lot to do with how much compost or what type of compost you're putting in there. So we'll touch on that a little bit later when we get down to the augmenting soils part, but I just wanted to touch on it now as a key chemical attribute of soil that you really need to pay attention to. So what can happen if you have a low pH soil? If you have an acid soil here, basically your calcium and magnesium become more available, where some other micronutrients might become to the levels of toxic. If you have a really, really low soil, your manganese can become really high. So, and when I say really low, I mean maybe under 4, which I don't know how often you all see them. I don't see under really 5 too very often here, but it's definitely something to be aware of. Now with alkaline soils, there are several micronutrients that become less available the higher you get. And micronutrients, those aren't, they're not as important as your nitrogen, your phosphorus, and your potassium. But if you do have a problem with them, you will notice it in your plants. And a lot of it is once you get the other 3 fine-tuned, the plant will start to exhibit these micronutrients problems because they're getting all of their major ones, all their macronutrients. So it's just something to be aware of, that having either really low or really high pH can start to change your micronutrient requirements of your plants. Now the soil cation exchange capacity. This is getting really into soil fertility, so I don't want to touch on it too much, but it will help you understand how much your soils can hold nutrient-wise. So your CEC, that's your cation exchange capacity, measures the total amount of exchangeable cations, and those are the positive ions in soils. So calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, all of those are positive. The higher the CEC, the more cations a soil can retain. So basically, if you have a high CEC, it can hold on to nutrients a lot more. Now, going back to talking about soil texture, clays will have higher CECs than any sand or silt because they have the ability to exchange nutrients. Those little accordion can hold on to nutrients more. They have a higher cation exchange capacity. And you will see this in a soil test if you take one. So the more clay, the higher the CEC. Soils with low CECs, that's between 1 and 10, have a high sand content, and you'll have a lower water holding and nutrient holding capacity. So if you get a soil test back and it says you have a CEC of 2, you know you're going to have a battle of keeping your plants well watered and up in with enough nutrients. However, with sands, they tend to move faster than clays. And when I say move faster, you can change them quicker. So you need less lime and less time to increase your pH in a sandy soil. But at the same time, you might need to do it more frequently because things will leach out. They'll go through the soil much more often. Soils with a high CEC, and this is 15 to 40, will have a high clay content or humus. Now when I say humus, this is organic matter. That's the broken dead debris stuff on the top of your soil. So humus and organic matter are somewhat interchangeable in the soil science speak. So if I say one or the other, that's what I'm referring to. Now they'll have a high water holding capacity. So basically what that means is you'll be able to retain nutrients more, but you might also have problems when it comes to correcting things because it will take a greater amount of those to change it. Now looking at just another little figure I have here, it gives you a basic breakdown of what to expect if you get your soil test back and you have your 2 to 5, you're going to be in your sand, your 5 to 12 sandy loams, etc. Just kind of, it's something that you can take a look at and have an idea of what type of soil you're going to be dealing with just at a glance. All right. So This is probably one of the most useful resources when it comes to deciding what your soil type is. Now this is the web soil survey, and here, this is the link to get to it. You can either just go to this link or Google web soil survey. It's run by the NRCS, this is the USDA, and they took all their old soil surveys that they used to have in extension offices, in NRCS offices, all those types that were actually physically books, and they put it on the internet, which is pretty fantastic because now you don't have to go anywhere to know what kind of soil you have. So what you do is, hang on one second, when you click this Start Web Soil Survey button, it'll take you to a page that looks like this, and I am sorry for the quality of that slide, that picture did not come out well, but this page will give you a bunch of options of how to find what soil you're looking for. You can do it by address, you can look by state, you can look by, latitude or longitude. So I use an address, and this is actually the research farm down by the school, just as an idea of what to look for in your area. So I just typed in the address, and it took me there. Type in the address here, and it'll zoom you to where you're going. And then our next slide will be your area of interest. So you have all these nice little buttons up here that you can zoom in, zoom out, all that fun stuff, and draw your area of interest. So I picked this field here to focus on and drew my little area of interest around it. And it told me exactly what kind of soils are in it. And this is a breakdown over here. As you can see, it's got some sessile, so it's got some state soils in there. It'll tell you the areas, the acres of that soil type. So I have a total of 37 acres here. And our sessile sandy loam is 21 of those acres, which is 56 or over half of the field. So when I deal with farm fields, I go with the top. Usually when you see anything that's this high, I would go with that. I would manage this field off of the sessile and this Pacolet sandy loam. So that's how I would manage this as a farm field. Now most people, backyard gardens aren't going to be 37 acres, so you'll probably just be dealing with one type of soil in your backyard. You never know, you could be, on some kind of sand hill where you've got really clay, really sandy soils right next to each other. But generally, overall, you're going to be dealing with one thing in your backyard. So once you see this little box pop up here, you can click on your soil type. Go backwards. You can click on your soil type over here, and it'll pop this box up for you and go and describe all kinds of stuff in your sessile sandy loam 2 to 6% slope. It'll tell you what kind of elevation, the mean temperature, and just give you a whole rundown on a bunch of things that you can expect from your soil. It'll tell you if there's a restrictive layer, which can be really important if you have a lot of clayey soils, if you have a layer of heavy clay that might restrict you. If you have the sessile, there's not generally a restrictive layer more than 80 inches, so well more than anything that we would be dealing with. It's well drained. It'll tell you generally if it's poorly drained, well drained, excessively drained, all that type of good stuff. So this is pretty important. It'll tell you about your water table, all kinds of really interesting and very helpful facts. But that's not all the web soil survey does. So they have these little buttons up here at the top. That's your area of interest, your soil map. This is your Soil Data Explorer. Now this is a hefty chunk of information that you can get from here. So you click on the Soil Data Explorer, and it'll pop onto these lower tabs down here. Read your entries to soil, your suitabilities and limitations, soil properties and qualities. So basically, suitabilities and limitations is really great if you're ever decided to buy a new home and it was a septic. You could go there and you could look to see if that soil really could suit a septic, or you might have problems in the future. And it's also got the soil properties tab here, which describes a lot of these physical properties that I was talking about, so you can get an idea of what kind of organic matter to expect from your soil, the percentage of clay, the percentage of sand, what your cation exchange capacity is going to be like, all kinds of a great overview that will give you an idea of what you're going to be working with. All right. So now we know what soil. We know our soil very, very well. You got to test it. I cannot harp on it enough that if you don't know what's in your soil, you're doing yourself and your plants a huge disservice. Soil testing will evaluate the fertility that's already in your soil and help you understand what you need to amend it.
Hey, Stephanie, we keep getting some background noise. I just want to remind everybody to make sure your talk button is not on, and so mute your microphone up in the top left. If it's on,
yeah, thanks.
Just be mindful that noises behind you may be coming through. Thank you.
Well, are you even on that account? I don't know. The sibling logins? I don't know.
Yeah.
Matt or Mike,
is there a question?
Do you know how to mute whoever that is coming through for us?
It looks like Dolly Sandovica is coming up in the chat box or the audio box.
Get this song right to your password. Can't hear you.
All right. Well, so we're gonna try and continue. So soil. Oh, I see a question down here. Are probed soil tests reliable? What define probe? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. While you type that up, I'm going to go on and say a little bit about soil testing procedures. So for soil testing, basically you want to get your top 4 to 6 inches of soil. You can either use a probe or a hand trowel. This is where your rooting zone, where most of your nutrients are going to be collected, so that's the area you want to focus on. You don't want to go down to 18 inches or anything quite like that, because the nutrient content of 18 inches down isn't really going to matter too much to your tomato plant. So try and aim for these top bits. I've never really tried out the garden center test, so I can't speak for it myself. I know I personally prefer to send it out to the professionals. You can try it out. I might recommend that you take a test to send to the lab and then do one that purchased from the garden center and see what they're like comparatively, and if they're within the same ballpark, I would say go for it. But I've never done it personally. I send all my stuff to the lab.
Maybe Master Gardener. It's a Master Gardener's idea. I think it's
all right.
So, sorry to interrupt.
Can y'all mute it a little bit? I'm getting a lot of feedback right now. And I actually just lost my connection to my host, so I will be right back. There we go.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear. All right, great. Sample, so when you get these 4 to 6 inches samples, you want to do 5 or more from your area so you can get a whole scatter shot of it. So don't just take one from one little area and call it good enough. Try and grab from different locations. Place it in a plastic bucket. Make sure you don't do it in any kind of galvanized steel because your zinc levels will go wild. So plastic is generally best for this type of thing, and mix it together so you can get a good comprehensive feel. Generally recommended for every 2 to 3 years, but if you've got a really sandy soil, I might suggest every year just because things can change really quickly. Hey, Charlotte, I lost my moderator status when my thing went, so I can't advance my slides.
I'm sorry, I'll turn that back on.
Just throwing all kinds of monkey wrenches in today. All right.
Okay, yeah, that should be back. And we're still getting some background noise. So please, if you're joining by your phone, please mute your phone because sounds are coming through. Thank you.
All right, so this is just a nice little diagram of a quick way to soil test your own backyard. This is using a trowel, just these 4 to 6 top inches here. Just dig a little hole, you know, kind of stagger around your area to make sure you get the whole amount. Like, say we were sampling your garden over here. Don't just take all the samples from this little bit down here. You want to do one from here and maybe here and here. If you have an area that's got a lot of slope, try and get from the top, the side, and the bottom of the slope, because your soils will be a little different in each of them. So you're trying to get as representative as possible. Now, each of these should be a different test. You really shouldn't test for your vegetable garden and then say, hey, I can apply that to my trees and shrubs. They have completely different nutrient needs. So say you have a vegetable garden here, you've got some flowers, you've got some trees. You could possibly test these two together because they're both trees and shrubs, but you might want to do those separately just because of the different locations. So this would be a 4 different tests little house. All right, so common errors when it comes to soil sampling. Most of the time it's the samplers and not the lab's errors. Number 1 is not taking enough cores to get a whole overview of your soil. Failure to properly divide your area. Make sure you're not trying to test your azaleas and your tomatoes. Those might need some different needs, so watch out for that. Failure to cover the whole area and contaminated samples. So if you just get enough soil samples, make sure that you separate them properly and don't put them in a zinc or a galvanized steel bucket, you should be good. All right, so this is a picture of what you can get if you went into your local extension office and asked for a soil testing kit. You can get your nice little box here and your sheets to fill out. And I've got copies right here. It's pretty simple. You just fill out your name, address, your number of samples, and your county, where it is collected. This is pretty important. Don't, you know, you could have an address somewhere in the coastal plains, but collected it from the Piedmont. So you might want to make sure you really indicate where you collected it. And then you just have your basic identifiers of how you identified each of your boxes. Whether it had lime in the past 12 months, this is pretty important to know what to do with your pH. And then these codes that we'll talk about that are on this page here. So if you sample from your azaleas and camellias, make sure you definitely put in that 20 code. But if you decided you wanted to test for your roses or your vegetables, just make sure you put in each of the codes, because each plant needs a wildly different type of nutrient set. All right, so you send off your test after you sample it. What do you expect to get back? You have your typical tests here, and they'll test for phosphorus, potassium, and your micronutrients. That's your manganese, your zinc, your copper, and your sulfur. And also test for pH, your HM percentage, which is your humic or organic matter, and your CEC. Now this is what the lab, your state school affiliated lab comes back with. There are private labs out there that can test for a slew of different needs, but if you send a test up through the extension office, this is the report that you'll get back. And it's pretty simple to read. Basically, it is very, very well covered. Here are your additional test results that I was talking about, your humic matter, your CEC. So this is the sandier soil because it's probably a silty loam because it's between 5 and 12. Your manganese, your zinc, your copper, and your sulfur. Now these are the more important micronutrients that you should pay attention to. But here, this is your phosphorus and your potassium. And it's saying for this Joe Gardner, they're coming back in the optimum level of phosphorus with their 55 parts per million, but they're a bit low in their potassium. So because of this, and they also have a pH of 6, which the range that they were looking for in their garden was between 6.2 and 6.8. It's saying it's a little under. So your recommendations are right here. This is the important stuff. Your lime recommendations and your NP and K. These are your main 3 macronutrients. So it's saying you need 45 pounds per 1,000 square feet of lime to apply to your vegetable garden. And you will also need 7 pounds of 15-0-14. So this 15, this is your nitrogen that's required. Since we're in our optimum phosphorus level, we don't really need any of that. And then your 14 is your potassium index, which you'll need for that. We don't test for nitrogen here because it volatilizes and leaches so easily. You can't get a accurate reading in your soil. So that's why it's important to put down what type of vegetable, of plant you're growing. All right. So we've got we know our soil, we know what's in our soil. Now what the heck do we do with all this knowledge? We're going to manage it. So we have two things you can do. You can either amend your soil or you can mulch it. An amendment is any material you mix into the soil. A mulch is anything you place on the surface. So mulching isn't really amending it so much as helping keep your water level as well. So the benefits are it'll reduce your raindrop impact, which is really important to keeping your soil where it's supposed to be. It'll keep your soil warm in the winter and cool in the summer so that it doesn't take a really long time to warm up and get to that optimum temperature for root growth, but it won't be so hot in the summer as to create plant wilt. You'll retain your moisture easier, and depending on what type of mulch you grow, it can really break down into a good organic matter for you. So types of mulches, what I consider the good mulches and to be used very carefully mulches. You have your wood chips, your straw, your grass clippings. These plastic fibers usually come with something like stone or wood chips on top of it. These won't break down so much, obviously, as plastic as the rest of these. I personally always use straw and hay. It's been a bit of a bear this summer with it being so warm. I've had a little bit of hay growth in my own yard, but it really breaks down pretty well into a good organic matter. Now, when I say use carefully, pine straw, it tends to be more acidic. So if you're going to mulch with pine straw, I would suggest something like around your trees or your azaleas or your blueberries. That type of thing is okay for pine straw, but I wouldn't necessarily put it by your tomatoes. Chipped leaves are the same way. If you get too much leaf cover, you will drive up your carbon content, which will inhibit microbial activity in your soil. So you will actually have a lot of problems, and I've learned this the really hard way. One year I had terrible germination and just plant growth because they didn't have enough nitrogen. Everything was binding up in the soil. And sawdust, you can kind of have the same problem as that above. So watch out for those three. Now your amendments, these are what you mix into your soil and pretty much probably what everyone's been waiting for. So it's your peat, your compost, your cover crop, green manure, worm castings, fertilizers, and lime. So peat, and this you can buy pretty much anywhere. Sphagnum peat, it's great for creating organic matter, and it's great for both clay and sandy soil. So if you mix the peat into your clay, it will help break up that dense structure, especially if you have any compacting. Because it's spongier, it'll give more room so that water won't continue to just build up. It's useful for sandy soils because it'll help retain water and nutrients. So it works both ways. Peat's a really great amendment for your troublesome soils both ways. It tends to be more acidic, so if you do have a clay soil where you want to grow blueberries, which you definitely need a low pH, you might want to think about mixing in some peat to help not only decrease your pH level, but to also help break up some of that dense compaction and let those roots really grow. Compost, great for all soil types. I could talk about compost forever. I am a huge fan of compost, and while it can't cure all the world's woes, it can do a lot for soils. It's a fantastic source for organic matter, which will help bind your nutrients and water to your sandy soil, creates pores. This is the first year I use my compost that I've been building up for the past I'd say 6 months to a year in my garden, and I've had the best year ever so far. I am loving it. I cannot speak enough about composting. It's one of those great long-term food sources. So we'll talk a little bit when I get to fertilizers about quick-release fertilizers and slow-release fertilizers. Compost, because it's breaking down by microbes, it's a slow release. So you won't just get one shot of nitrogen really, really fast, and then it's all gone. It will slowly release the nutrients over time, so at different growth stages, your plants will be getting what they need. It enhances the food web. You know, the more compost you have, the more bugs you have, and bugs in the soil are much better than bugs on your plants. You definitely want more of the buggies in your soil. Any kind of worm, microbe, all that stuff, compost is a fantastic feeder for them. All right, cover crop and green manure, they kind of go hand in hand. Cover crop is, by definition, a high density plant growing on the soil surface as cover. You're not growing it for harvest or anything like that. You're strictly growing it to add nutrients into the soil. Cover crop's great because it acts like a mulch. It will keep your soil at the correct temperature, and it also will keep your soil in place. And you say, oh, I might be getting some nutrients taken out of it because it's, you know, growing. But once you can either cut that down, you know, till it in, mow it down, that type of thing, then that turns into green manure. So all this stuff that was growing, all this beautiful organic matter, will then be tilled back into your soil. You tend to see this a little bit more in commercial agriculture because I know a lot of people don't want to till up their backyard every year, but that's potentially something to look out for. Also, if you plant a perennial grass or a legume, legumes will put nitrogen into your soil. So if you plant a red clover, let's say, in here, not only will you be getting organic matter and cover and all kinds of good stuff, you will also be getting nitrogen added to your soil. So there are definitely pros to having both cover crop followed by the green manure. If you just want to, you know, take your cover crop off without mixing it in too, that's fine. You don't have to always do one or the other. Worm castings are very related to compost. Like I was saying with soil structure, the stuff that worms spit out helps bind your soil structure together. And the better structure you have, the better plant growth you'll get. Like compost, it's slow release, so you'll get your nutrients over a slower amount of time, not just one fast shot when you put it on. It's neutral pH, which I cannot stress is good enough. You really have to watch with your compost what the pH is. That's where you can run into a lot of high pH problems. If you have a compost that's very high in pH, you will actually start to get some alkaline problems. You can also test your compost like you can test your soil so you can get an idea of what's in there and what the pH is. For more information, visit this link below. It's a really great source of information and where you can start your worm population if that's something you'd be really interested in. All right, so soil fertilizers. These are both any organic or inorganic material. Now, when I say organic, I mean something that comes from an animal or another living being. Inorganic is something that is synthesized in a lab. That is the definition of organic versus inorganic when you're dealing with straight fertilizers. Now, they supply the certain elements that are required for plant growth. And if you're low on one, you're going to find all kinds of plant problems. Now, the quantity of each of these elements is needed to increase the plant growth. So if you're low on, for example, our soil test, you're low on potassium, you definitely want to get that in there because you can start to see low potassium can lead to blossom end rot and all kinds of different things like that. So you can have some nutrients supplied from the soil, but not always. So organic fertilizers. These are byproducts of animal or vegetable substance. They contain enough nutrients to be considered a fertilizer. So your liquids, these are your hog and dairy slurries, vegetable processing byproducts, fish emulsions. If you go to a home improvement store, you can see a lot of the fish emulsions, which are a great source of nitrogen, but a side story here, I tried to grow that on my zucchini one year. It did great until my dog found them and decided to dig the zucchinis up because it tasted so good. So if you're going to do something that's an animal byproduct, be careful because your own animals could decide that they wanted to eat it more than your zucchinis did. Your solids are your bed pack from dairy, beef, or horse operations, glitter from chicken houses, mushroom compost, and your meals, your blood, feather, crab, etc. All these good things that are a really great source of nitrogen. So when you see this number, this first one is always your N, this one is always your phosphorus, and this last one is always your potassium. So depending on what time of the year it is, definitely the more tomatoes grow, the more you just want to hit them with nitrogen. It takes a ton of nitrogen to put those nice tomatoes out. All right, so your synthetic fertilizers are a pre-mixed amount of N, P, and K, and you're seeing a lot more sulfur anymore added into it, often seen as 10-10-10. They can come in granulated, liquid, or powdered form. So granulated, these are stable forms. They're the little pellets that you often see. A lot of times these are slow release. They'll break down over time. They can even have coating that will take a while to break them down. Your liquid fertilizers are basically your elements. They're fast release. You hit them right there with it. It's going to go in pretty quickly. A lot of your powders will turn into liquids because they're soluble in water, and again, they're faster. Now with synthetic fertilizers, more is not better, and I cannot stress this enough. What your soil test says you need is what you need. Just because it says 10 pounds of nitrogen does not mean 20 will be better. Really pay attention to what your soils need, because if you over-fertilize, you're just going to have that nutrients run off your yard or through your lawn and get into a water body, which is not anything good. So your synthetic fertilizers, for example, here we have a 25-3-5 fertilizer. This is all in percentages. So this is 25% nitrogen, 3% phosphate, and 5% potash. Your soil test result comes back, you need 4 pounds of this. How the heck do I even get there? So for 4 pounds of 25-3-5, if they don't have a pre-blended form for you, you can go out and you can apply 1 pound of nitrogen to your crops. You can apply 0.12 pounds of phosphate and 0.2 pounds of potash. A lot of the home improvement stores will have blends that are pretty common, like your 10-10-10. But this is a way that you can mix your own to make sure you're really getting what you need. Most garden recommendations are given in pounds per 1,000 square feet. You have your application methods of putting these down. Most often we see broadcasting in vegetable gardens. Also a little bit of side dressing. Basically you band. This is when you put it all in a line next to where you plant your crops. Be careful with banding because you can potentially burn your roots. Broadcasting is just a scatter shot, putting it all over. Top dressing, that's a lot what you do to your lawn, putting all your nitrogen on top of it. And this is a side dressing of corn. I do this a lot for my tomatoes. I'll side dress it with nitrogen to make sure it's getting enough when it's putting all those beautiful tomatoes on. And I'm running out of time, or I'd go into this deeper, so please come back and look at this if you have any questions. This is a great calculation to figure out how much nutrients you need to apply for what your soil test says. So you have X here is the pounds of nutrients recommended from your soil test, and Y is the percent of nutrients in the fertilizer, and Z is how big of your garden. So say a gardener needs is using a 3400 fertilizer. He needs 2 pounds of nitrogen on per 1,000 square feet, and the garden is 1,400 square feet. How much of this fertilizer is required? So X is your 2. So X here, this is your 2 pounds that's required. Your Y is 0.34, it's that percentage of nitrogen, and your Z is the 1,400 square feet. So entering those numbers, you'll end up with 8.2 pounds of 3400 that you need to apply to your garden. A really helpful conversion is 1 pint equals 1 pound. Because I know I've tried to do crazy calculations in my head sometimes in the store, and it can be very tricky. So just one to one, it's pretty helpful. And our last amendment that I'm going to talk about is soil pH. As I said before, 7 is neutral, below is acid, above is alkaline. 6.8 to 7.2 is near neutral. So in that range, you're about as neutral as you can get. Most crops grow between 6.2 and 6.8. In North Carolina, you're generally going to aim for 6.5. You like it's a little more acidic. It works well with the soils down there. Raising your pH. Calcium carbonate, that's your lime. That's how you raise your pH. It's commonly sold anywhere. The finer the grind you have in a fertilizer, the faster it will react in lowering the pH, but you also might have to worry about it blowing away on a really windy day. Calcitic lime is mostly calcium carbonate. That's generally what you're getting. Dolomitic lime has both calcium and magnesium in it. Soils that are really sandy, generally you might want to get dolomitic lime because they tend to be lower in magnesium levels. But that's about the only difference between those two. Otherwise, use whichever you find cheaper, better, etc. So this is a nice little chart on what you need to do to increase your pH. So you have a 5.5 soil that you want to get up to 6. If you have a sandy soil, and this is where it's really important to know what kind of soil you're dealing with, you're only going to need 20 pounds per 1,000 square feet to increase your pH. Like I was saying, clays take a longer time and more soil to react. So if you've got a really low pH down here, it's going to be taking you a while. Pretty much the only thing that would do well in the 4 range are your azaleas and blueberries. Other than that, you want to be up more here to 6 to 6.2. Lowering your pH isn't quite as big of a concern on the East Coast. We tend to have more acidic soils as it is. But if you're really going to work with hydrangeas or blueberries, you do have to work with a low pH. So this is something that might be applicable. Elemental sulfur is a chemical that can be used. Also iron sulfate. Like I said earlier, peat can be incorporated that will help establish those acid-loving plants on a higher pH soil. Fertilizers will also reduce your pH, but do not use them as the main way to reduce your pH because then you will be over-applying your nutrients. It's a byproduct, so if you do have a higher soil, you might want to use something that's more nitrogen-based if it's recommended for you. And then here's another little chart on your sulfur and your iron sulfate, how much of what it will take to change your pH is. And that is it for me. If there are any questions, this is a nice list of resources that I really find very helpful in gardening and building this presentation. And I just want to say thanks for letting me talk with you all. I love to talk about soil.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box, or is anyone typing? Maybe a couple
I don't see any
people.
questions either.
There we go. Or just the thanks. Will the slides be available? Would you be willing to share the slides if I convert them to a PDF?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
No, that's why I like to kind of make it a little more text heavy so people can go back and remember it. So definitely they'll be available.
Oh, thank you. So I will post them on NCSU Garden and send out that link as well as the links that Stephanie has mentioned and some other things that will be mentioned later on to everyone after the webinar.
Wood ash. I saw a question. Do I have a couple minutes for a question? So I saw one about wood ash and one about, basically wood ash it tends to be higher in calcium carbonate and it can be a filler for a lot of composting sites. And because it's calcium carbonate, it will drive up your pH. So if you're not very careful with how much wood ash you put into either your compost or some compost that's bought, you can end up with really alkaline soils, which alkaline soils are actually harder to grow crops on than acidic soils.
All right. I think the other question was about, are you familiar with, I think they're trying to say mycorrhizae.
Yes, and I don't think I have quite enough time to talk about mycorrhizae right now.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephanie. We really appreciate you joining us this morning and sharing your knowledge. And
and if anyone has any questions, all my email and all my contact information is at the beginning of this. Feel free to give me a call or an email anytime. I'm more than happy to talk about soil and all its related things.
All right. Thank you so much.
Hi, Charlotte.
All right.
Before we move on, I just want to let everybody know that if you can see your name in the upper left audio and video box, that means that we can hear you. So that's where the sound is coming from. So right now you see my name there because I'm speaking.
Yes.
When it gets quiet, whatever feed has the sound coming from, that is the one that will have the name up there. So if any of the participants see their name up there, try to mute your microphone, please. Especially with the talk button, unclicking that, or muting it in some way with your app or however you can. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And if you don't see that black box at the top left of the screen, there's a little arrow beside video and audio you click on, and that will pop up for you. All right. Thank you. All right. Well, we are going to again say thank you to Stephanie for joining us and for sharing her knowledge and for being so willing to follow up with questions, you know, if you wish to contact her, and for being willing to share those slides, which I'll post so that you can have access to them. But now we're going to move on to our current issues, and with Matt Bertone talking about insects and Mike Munster talking about what we're seeing in plant diseases. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
All right, we're going to mix it up on you like we like to do, and I'm going to go first this month. Also, I just noticed, Charlotte, that there's a consonant missing in my last name there, so on that slide. So maybe if you could add me an N there between the U and the S.
Absolutely, I will do that. I don't think I can do it live, but I will make sure it's there for the next time. Thank you for pointing that out.
I don't know why I didn't say that before. Okay, we are going to ride the bullet train here and talk about some disease problems. First of all, I guess everybody can hear me. I know Charlotte could, but there's, I know, a lot of interest out there in helping people with their tomato problems, and as it happens, we, with the first 10 years of data in our Plant Disease and Insect Clinic current database, have a good resource to kind of go back and look at some of these things, and I went back and put together some information on the last 10 years of tomato troubles, which I will give a quick summary of here and talk about some of the main things that you may be seeing or getting as questions. First of all, and I believe I used this slide in the last PPP, but diseases are seasonal, and you'll notice that we are in now mid to late June, so it's the high point for many of our diseases in the tomatoes. Some of the things that we saw earlier excuse me, will be fading out eventually, and then a few things will come in late. Notice that early blight and late blight do have a lot of overlap in their seasons, but the earliest occurrence of early blight in home gardens during that 10-year period was on May 22nd, whereas the earliest occurrence of late blight was on June 22nd. So they're a little bit misleading. They do begin early blight earlier, but they, again, overlap. And gray leaf spot is something we see quite late in the season. What I didn't get around to talking about last time was which are the most important problems in tomatoes. So based on the 10 years from 2008 to 2017, we got almost 80 homegrown tomato samples with a certain problem, over 50 with another one, and over 40 with the third most popular. So here is a list of choices, and take a minute to look at these and decide what you think the number 1, number 2, and number 3 tomato problems that we diagnosed in the clinic were during that period of time. So, for example, if you felt that it was the top 3 in that list were the top 3 in order on the diagram, then just put the letters A, B, C in the chat box, and we'll just do that as an exercise for a minute. So remember, we want, yes, as Charlotte put there, hit A, and Charlotte's choice is there, OAB. So Charlotte felt that tomato spot wilt was the top one, and then bacterial spot and bacterial wilt. So we want 3 letters from each of you. Excuse me. Take another few seconds here. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we do have a winner. Donald Fox, congratulations. The number 1, 2, and 3 problems that we had in this period of time were first bacterial wilts, then tomato spotted wilt virus, and then chemical injury. And I want to take a few minutes to first mention that even though these are the top 3, as you can see on this graph here, the number 4 was Septoria leaf spot or Septoria blight, fungal disease, and then Fusarium wilt and Pythium disease. Pythium's kind of tricky because that's going to be a problem only early in the season and probably secondary to some other kind of problems that are happening there. And then early blight, and then I just threw a few others in. These aren't in, don't include all of them, but you'll notice that relatively few samples of tomatoes are coming in with even sub-stem blight or late blight or gray leaf spot. So some of the things that we think about is that big names in tomato problems are actually happening on a fairly small number of samples in terms of the things come in from homes. So let's talk about these big 3 just briefly. Number 1, bacterial wilts caused by Ralstonia solanacearum, and the overall symptom that you would see would be the wilting of the plant itself. And if you cut into the stem, you notice that there's some discoloration in the vascular tissue here, which in and of itself isn't diagnostic because it could also be Fusarium wilt if you see that. But if you take a cut stem of that tomato and put it in some water, and just a still glass of water or beaker, whatever you happen to have in your kitchen, you'll notice that a stream or streams of milky material will come out in the first 30 to 60 seconds there, showing that you have large quantities, vast numbers of bacteria in the vascular system there oozing out, and that will tell you you have it. Now, this is not going to always work, but if you do see this, then you know what your problem was. It is a permanent resident in the soil, so once you've got it, then your soil is contaminated, and you will have problems on tomatoes in the future and some other plants as well. Let's see. Got a couple of questions here in the chat box. Does the location in the state make a difference in these results? I have not broken it down to look where the, if different, let's say mountains versus Piedmont versus coastal plain have more disease problems, if the number 1, 2, and 3 change depending on what part of the state you are in. That's a good question. I guess that's the, are there regional areas that are more of a hot spot for certain tomato diseases? Likewise, I don't have the answer to that question, but I suspect that some of the really hot weather things will be more common in the Piedmont and coastal plain than in the mountains. And vice versa, you would never see verticillium wilt in the Piedmont or the coastal plain on tomatoes because that does not tolerate high temperatures. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can send this out to you folks as a PDF file. Oh no, it doesn't allow PDFs. File transfer, okay. You should be getting a message on your systems now saying that there's a file being offered to you, which is basically the summary here, what to think about as possibilities when tomatoes are wilting. And it can be anything from high soluble salts to a couple of the diseases that we talked about. And there are a few ideas of what to look for there and some comments. Fortunately, because of time constraints, we're not going to be able to spend too much on this, but I hope it's a handy thing if you're able to get that downloaded and print it off. Number 2 problem that we see on tomatoes is tomato spotted wilt, and this is very interesting because of how variable it is from year to year. It varied from 0 to 18% of the home tomato samples during those 10 years in any given year came out with this disease, and so far it's been 40%. But of course, as the season goes on, we start seeing some of our later season diseases that will change, that will come down. But it's been a bad year for tomato spotted wilt, both in tomatoes and in tobacco, and we'll have to see in some other crops what it's going to do. But here we're seeing the upper foliage showing this kind of spotting. There may be sort of rings or other patterns on the leaves, and some yellowing and some mild wilting. You get the spots also on the fruits themselves, and rings here quite prominently in this case. This is a disease transmitted by thrips brought in from the weeds. And our number 3 problem that we see is herbicide injury, mostly from spray drift, but you also have to be aware that it could come as residue in a sprayer from previous applications, or even carryover in manure or compost. And here's an example. This is one of the few cases where we actually knew exactly what was going on, or were able to find out. This sort of shoestringy deformation, curling of the leaflets, and the message that we got about this afterward. The grower called this morning to say he had discovered the source of the problem. The electric cooperative had someone spray the power line right away with a combination of chemicals containing 2,4-D. He had a bunch of pots stacked in that area that got contaminated. So this is an example of a synthetic auxin type 2,4-D type herbicide injury on tomato. And here's another one where we also know that it was a known exposure to 2,4-D causing this deformation. Very different but extremely common is what happens with glyphosate exposure. Tomato is very sensitive to this compound, and it classically forms a bright yellow discoloration at the base of the leaflets. So you can see that both here and here, getting some necrosis and dead tissue forming in this case as well. So that is very typical of a drift from glyphosate application near the vegetable garden. As far as herbicide carryover in manure and compost, there's a publication. You can go to the website here for this information about the problem, and even a little recommendation on how you can do a bioassay, planting some bean seeds or pea seeds in the mulch and without the mulch to see if that was the source of the problem. This happened this year to someone a professor in the horticulture science department. I didn't get any pictures to show of what happened, but it was clear that compost that he had applied, or not him, but the landscaper had applied, that damaged a lot of his plants. Some other tomato problems quickly here. What do you think might be happening? This is from Rockingham County several years ago now. Anybody want to take a stab? Southern blight, southern stem blight. I am sorry to report that that is not the case. If you look closely, you might think there's some of that mycelial growth of southern stem blight, but in this case, there was, after incubation, that fungus did not grow out. It was also negative for bacterial wilt and fusarium wilt. The determination here was high soluble salt injury. Soluble salt index in the soil was 140, pH was 6, but it was just burned by salt. So that's probably just some salt deposit there. I didn't work the sample up myself, but that's likely what that was. But it could have fooled you as far as looking like southern stem blight. How about this situation here? Any takers? High pH. Actually, I don't know if we have the pH for this situation, but you're on the right track here. Yes, this here is magnesium deficiency, the interveinal chlorosis that you see on the lower leaves, and this is probably what we call physiological leaf roll here, and there's a number of possible contributing factors. I understand high temperatures, pruning, excess nitrogen, and I'm not really qualified to talk more about this. Our guest speaker could have explained things about how the magnesium uptake then competes with calcium, etc., etc. But the thing I wanted to point out here was that the grower submitted this thinking it was disease, and it turned out to be basically a nutritional and physiological issue. Here's another picture of the same problems. Magnesium deficiency, that yellow, interveinal chlorosis. Well, I guess that's redundant. The interveinal chlorosis on the lower leaves. Okay. Now, we all know what this is, blossom end rot, but what I want to ask you is, what do you recommend? What advice do you give when people come in with this problem? Okay, Elizabeth says calcium, but what about it? How do you recommend it? Sean, lower the nitrogen fertilizer. Foliar spray, gypsum next year. Okay, a lot of good things there. No one's mentioned this one, but this sounds like I'm making this up, but my wife's sister's daughter's husband's mother told me last year that she had seen on, I guess on TV or something, that what you do for this is you scatter some eggshells around the plant, and when she did it, things got better. And I actually, that didn't make sense to me, but I'm not the expert on soil chemistry. I asked Chris Gunter in the Horticulture Science Department, though, and he said, I think putting eggshells in the soil will raise calcium in that small local zone, but it will take a very long time and be of limited concentration, which would likely be too low to make a difference in a single season. Right, and it sounded like he was even giving the advantage there, or the benefit of the doubt, saying in the soil. And he emphasized about usually it's a question of calcium uptake rather than supply, which depends on the transpiration stream, so that's where we get the whole thing about not letting the plants dry down. And of course, many people's experience, mine included, is that those first clusters are the ones that are affected, and sometimes you get better results after that, with or without eggshells. I just want to remind everyone that the NC EMG manual, chapter 16, says the following. Applying preventive sprays of calcium chloride to the tomatoes is not very effective. To prevent the problem in the future, maintain an even moisture level by regular watering and using good mulch. Plant in well-drained soil and avoid using high nitrogen fertilizers. Do not cultivate deeply close to the plant. Test soil and use lime as recommended to bring the pH up to 6.5 to 6.8. So there you go, a lot of the things that you've already have already talked about. What's with the green spot on the ripe fruit? Right, let me ask, is that research-based info? Which info is that? Pat from Lee County. Okay, well, she's replying to that. Oh, the eggshells. No, I don't know anyone who has done the eggshells. That was a statement from Chris about the basically a priori what would happen and how the eggshells would probably not be of much value. being on the surface there and taking time to release the calcium. What's with the green spots on the right fruit? Here the description was, otherwise healthy tomato plants are producing some tomatoes with green spots. These green spots do not dip down or feel different from the skin of the fruit. They're about 0.1 to 0.3 inches wide. And yes, pretty much everybody got this one. This is suspected stink bug feeding. And how would you confirm it? According to our entomologist, that's Mapertone, by the way, the irregular spots appear to be feeding damage from stink bugs. If cut open, it should be spongy inside and white under the damage. So, suspected stink bug feeding injury for those. The last thing I want to say about tomatoes is about Phytophthora diseases. We often think about Phytophthora infestans, which causes late blight, excuse me, but occasionally there are problems with Phytophthora nicotianae, and this year has been particularly bad for that fungus in not only tomatoes but in other plants as well. Here's the difference between late blight and buckeye rot. They look pretty similar, and they also look pretty similar on the leaves. So if you've got this, you're not sure what Phytophthora you have, it would be good to submit a sample. I encourage everyone to go to the Plant Pathology Extension portal, where Inga Meadows and others have just last week, I think it was, put a post about the Phytophthora nicotianae causing problems on vegetables, potatoes, and tomatoes, and the differences between late blight and Phytophthora nicotianae. The main one being that late blight is airborne, and we have not yet seen late blight on tomatoes in North Carolina this year, although there was a report last week in New York, state of New York. With that, I just want to segue very quickly. Instead of doing a long list of bolos, I'm just going to highlight 3 or 4 things to be on the lookout for in the next 2 months, and one of them, Phytophthora diseases. This is a sample that came in this month from Camden County, and there was Phytophthora both in the stems and in the roots of these begonias. Notice the lack of mulch. The Phytophthora from the soil can splash up on the foliage, and we don't usually see this in begonia, very common in Madagascar periwinkle and the annual vinca, but mulching is an important strategy there to keep it from splashing on the soil. We're really set up for some bad Phytophthora this year, I think, because of the heavy rains that we had and now the hot weather, so the plants are going to be stressed after having had a root rot episode during the wet weather. It's also the season for slime flux. We got our first inquiry about that this week. In fact, just yesterday, a woman who wanted to know what was happening to her oak tree, and you could see the crown looks good, but down at the base there's some kind of wet areas, cracks in the bark where stuff is oozing out and insects being attracted to it. And we've talked about this before on the program. Trees will sometimes flux one year, they may not flux the next year, and it's not a serious issue. The most that we would recommend doing was if you have some loose bark, actually loose bark, to remove it, but don't try tapping pipes in it or anything like that. It's caused by a bacterial infestation, if you want, or colonization of the wood, so there's wet wood in there, but it's not something that's going to be a serious issue for the health of the tree. White oak is probably the most common species that we see it on. Also be on the lookout for boxwood blight. We had these 2 samples come in last week from Watauga County. We had not seen it in any home gardens in that county yet, but it did show up. Again, I wonder if all the rains from Alberto were helping. We've seen cases before where tropical moisture, extremely heavy rains will really push this disease even on varieties that are supposed to be less susceptible. So keep an eye out for remember the 3 telltale signs of boxwood blight. It was defoliation, brown leaf spots, and dark streaks on the green stems. And what I say is if you see 2 out of those 3, then you've got a boxwood blight diagnosis. But of course, we're here to double check that for you and look for the fungus in the tissue. Matt, do we want to do this, or do you want to go ahead and get started?
I think, yeah, we can try this. Let's try and be quick, I guess. But I can go pretty quickly through mine if we need to be. Maybe we'll be a couple minutes over 12.
All right, we're going to flip a coin here so that it's not biased and you won't try and guess what the answer is based on who's presenting it. But just as a reminder, or for new people, this is a little game we do occasionally on the program. And if you think that what we're showing is a case of a critter, in other words, an insect, a mite, spider, mollusk, or a vertebrate, then you do the green check on the little interaction box there under your name. If you think that it's something other than a critter, either disease or an abiotic problem, some kind of a human-induced problem, then you click the red X, and we see how you do. Have a scorekeeper at each location to take a consensus of those in the room before you put up your answer, and then keep track of your score as you go along. So here's the coin flip. Matt, call it.
Tails.
Tails it is.
All right.
So, take it away.
All righty. So the first one. Let's see what we got here. Here you go. Critter or not. This is on Yoshino Cherry in Caldwell County. All right, we're going to have to be pretty brisk, so I'll give you another 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All righty.
I saw someone change their answer at the last second there, too.
We have a lot of no's, a few yeses. All right. Well.
Nope, this is not a critter. Those holes were just the leaf spots falling out. It's a reaction that prunus species do. And in this case, on the ornamental cherry trees, it's often caused by a fungus called, a wonderful name, Passiflora circumcissa. And these are micrographs of what the spore-bearing structures and the spores themselves on the right look like. So, my turn to present the next slide. This is a dogwood that came from Burke County, and there seemed to be this kind of flattened area with younger bark and these tufts of tough fibers coming out of each of several spots. Critter or not? Ten. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, a little bit closer competition in this one, but the consensus is?
The critters have it. So this is physical damage, most likely from a cicada, although it's tough to tell after the fact. You can see that the, let me get my arrow ready here, the scar tissue is healed over, but you can see the earlier damage where basically the sharp ovipositor of the insect was stuck in there. I actually found some eggshells when I split it open. But basically they insert their eggs into young twigs. The nymphs hatch and drop to the ground, and this didn't kill the plant. Obviously, it's healed over, but you still see those tufts of those frays from the physical damage. Okay, we'll clear this. All right, next one. Critter or not? So this is a Japanese maple from Columbus County. You can see here the whole plant, and here's an inset of the what's being affected. All right, this is a fun one. A lot of people answering. All right, we'll give it another 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's see the results, Mike. Oh, that's all right.
Sorry.
That's all right. Let's see.
Publishing to whiteboard.
Okay, so we have a lot of nots, a few yeses, and it is, well, I'll let you go, Mike.
It is not. This was another case like we showed with the tomatoes, a drift from a synthetic auxin herbicide, at least in the professional opinion of Dr. Joe Neal, an expert in herbicides. And one of the ways that you would know is that this is not something like, let's say, a virus or a mite infestation, is the way that, at least on this shoot here, it grew out of the damage. So if it had been a critter, it would be something that would be hiding away in that youngest foliage as well and not just disappear. Although I suppose we didn't think about this if they had controlled them somehow, but anyway, not the case here. There were no critters involved. And our last one, this one's very close to home. Our yellow poplar, and it will stand up between Kilgore Hall and the Phytotron with these strange sort of dimples.
Nipples?
Dimples. And I have a disagreement on how to call it. With chlorotic halos. Critter.
Critter or not. All right. Yeah.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, a lot of critter people say, okay, that's interesting, and that is actually, in fact, correct. If you were to look in each one of these dimples or nipples or whatever, you're going to find a little scale insect. Now, this is a really, really strange situation. I've never seen, nor I took these to Steve Franke, we've never seen armored scales like this on the leaves of tulip poplar. I am still trying to identify which one it is. It's very strange because these trees are deciduous. It's really a limited resource for them, and we're really curious about this. So we may get back to you with the ID later on, but this is definitely a critter, and if you were to look into each one of those, you'd find an individual scale. All right. Alrighty, well then, yeah, how'd you do?
I'm going to change the polling now. Instead of yes or no, I'm going to change it to an A, B, C, D, E, so that you can register how well you did. This will be available. You can put it in the chat box, sure. We won't be able to do a summary based on that, but if you put it up in the choices where you did click your green check or your red X, it is now an A, B, C, D, E format.
A lot of D's and E's. I think we're going to have to make it really hard next time.
Don't let your heart be full of revenge, man.
No, you know, just people want a challenge. Alrighty then. Well, because I have a limited amount of time, let's get going with that. I'm going to move right into my section. So, I'm going to clear that. All right. So, what's happening here? Anybody know? This is on Chestnut from Alamance County this June. Well, this is really interesting. We got this physical sample in, and there were a lot of these soldier beetles on the leaf. Now, this is a very characteristic case of an insect being infected with a fungus. The fungus causes the insects to behave differently. They will go up on the leaves of the plant. This one is a biting insect. You can see here this arrow shows the mandibles latching onto a vein. Then it dies and the fungus sporulates out of the abdomen, raining down spores on other insects around. It's a strategy of the fungus to get dispersal of the spores. It's much more commonly seen, at least I've experienced in the past, in flies. So you'll see a lot of flies up on plants. They look like they're hanging on. They don't have biting mouth parts, so they can't latch on with their mouths, even though you see it's trying to here. But they latch on with their legs, and you can see again the abdomen is distended with spores of the fungus raining down on other insects. So if you find a lot of these, certainly in the case of the soldier beetles are not plant feeders. It didn't die while trying to feed on the plant. It was just fungally infected. And flies also too don't normally feed on plants like that. Won't actually feed on plants like that. Okay, so just be on the lookout for entomopathogenic fungi killing insects. All right, so first insect I'm going to talk about, first group of insects I'm going to talk about today are azalea plant bugs. These are murids in the genus Rhinocapsis. We have two species, Van Duzii and rubricans. Shown here is Van Duzii. It has a half black and half pale antennal segment, second antennal segment. As with other murids, they have these two closed cells in the wing membrane. That's how you tell plant bugs in general. This group, these two species, are small, about 3 to 4 millimeters long, mostly reddish with dark patches, a dark base of the antenna, and lighter beyond. So the last segments are light. They also have a black nose, which is the clypeus. I'll show you that in a second, and also pale legs. Now, they're very common in the spring. It's actually a little late now for them because they are common when the azaleas are flowering. They will lay their eggs in the stems of azaleas, various types. Some types are less susceptible, or at least less used by these plant bugs. They won't hurt the plants, but they will emerge around when the time of flowering. So it's a little bit past that time, but I have gotten a couple messages about them. Now here's the other species, rubricans. You can see the entirely black second segment of the antenna, but here it shows the black nose, the clypeus, and you can see there's the sucking mouth parts typical of a bug. Now the one thing to bring up about this group and why I'm talking about them is that they may be very common, but they are not plant feeders per se. They will feed on pollen, but they're mostly predators of thrips, lace bugs, especially after they've molted, and soft nymphs of lace bugs, and other insects and mites, so they are beneficial. However, they do become a nuisance in high numbers because they will readily bite people when they get on the skin. They like to probe, as with many bugs, like minute pirate bugs and such. They will probe human skin, and they can leave little welts, and it can be quite painful sometimes. So if you're out there gardening in your azaleas in the spring, especially when they're flowering, be aware of these bugs. Note that if they are biting you, the bites usually go away fairly quickly, but that you may want to wear longer sleeves or protection otherwise. You don't want to really spray for them, though, necessarily, because they are very good predators of other insects and other pests. So just be aware. You see these little kind of mostly red on the head and the pronotum, the thorax. The wings and the abdomen become darker, basically. So be on the lookout next year when the azaleas are flowering, and maybe observe from afar. They're not, out to get you, but they like to probe. All right, now I've been getting a lot of messages about this little tick-like weevil everywhere. So a couple years ago, this is the first message I ever got of one. I didn't know what it was. Attached with some photos of a weevil species that was present last year at Mount Mitchell in moderate numbers and is there this year in much more impressive numbers. Seem to be found only at high elevations in spruce fir areas. We finally figured out what it was. Then this year, there have been a lot of these. A grower of mine sent me the picture of a weevil that's in his cornfield. They're everywhere, but they don't appear to be doing any damage. And then another one just got this email from a super, thinks he has annual bluegrass weevil problem. This is on a golf course, but this looks like something else. I didn't think that they were turf pests, but are known to come out in large numbers near managed turf. This, of course, is the yellow poplar weevil. So these weevils are very interesting, very common, and associated with yellow poplar. They are in the tribe Camerotini, which is actually a very tropical tribe. It's the only species we have in North America, and the species name is Odontopus calceatus. They're small, about 4 millimeters long, black, rough, with a very large triangular spine in the front femur. I'll show you that in a second. They feed mainly on tulip tree, Liriodendron tulipifera, but also will feed on magnolias and sassafras in that order. They're not really known to feed on anything else. Now, they do have one generation per year, which means they're univoltine, and the outbreaks are variable year to year. This year seems to be a big one. In fact, some of the pictures later on, I was going out to look for that scale on the tulip poplar that we used in Critter or Not, and found a lot of damage from this weevil, and was able to get some photos and whatnot. So, so looking at this weevil from another direction, from the front, you can see this very large triangular tooth on the front femur with these little saw-like teeth. That's a very good indication that you have this weevil. There are really no other weevils around that have such a large tooth on the front femur. And also the general round appearance you can see from above. They're very, very squat and kind of fat. Now they overwinter as adults in leaf debris and litter. They emerge in the spring out of their hibernation and feed on the undersides of leaves. So here's one I took from campus. You can see they have a very distinct resting posture. They typically hold their front legs out in like a V and their hind legs close to their body, sit very still. They will feed on the lower surface of the leaf, leaving a little brown window and leaving lots of little bits of frass and excrement all around. Now, what does this damage look like far out? The leaves will start to look like this. You'll get these little windows and patches, but when the damage is more dense, the leaf begins to lose water. It begins to brown and curl at the tip. You can see the damage is done to the underside, but can be seen on the upper side as well. Now, it causes this extensive damage on the leaves, depending on the infestation, the populations of the year. But again, because this is a leaf issue only, it typically, unless it was to defoliate or cause massive leaf damage several years in a row, the mature and healthy tulip poplars should be fine. It's not going to kill them, but it does make them look bad. Now here's a close-up of that damage. You can see again the frass right here and these little kind of pill-shaped or oblong windows, and again becoming deformed, where the leaf becomes deformed, where there's a lot of the damage, and you'll get these brown patches otherwise. Now after this, so they've emerged in the spring, they find the new leaves as adults and feed. Then when they're done feeding and mating, the females will insert eggs into the midrib of the leaves. And you can see here's the oviposition scars, and if you open this up, you see the eggs in there. These eggs will then hatch into larvae that mine the leaves. So here you can actually see the adult feeding damage. You can then also see where the eggs were. The larvae hatched and started feeding in a group and will mine around the leaf. And if you open that up, you'll see these flat, legless, grub-like larvae with yellow heads, and they'll produce this stringy frass inside. Again, on tulip poplars, if you see this, this is basically going to be what it is. Now, when they're done feeding the larvae, they will spin little cocoons, and you can see that black frass around too, within the leaf, and it sometimes pops out, and they will pupate there, and you will then have emergence of adults, and that second group of adults that came from those larvae this year will then at some point start to find areas in the litter, leaf debris, areas like that to overwinter. Even though it's still warm out, they're really not going to be interested in the trees later on in the year. So this is really the time of year that we're going to be seeing a lot of the issues. So maybe you could help me out. Have you seen this weevil or its damage? If you have, put a stamp on the area where you are. Now, tulip poplar, this seems to be a pest that is more common in the Piedmont and the West, but Mike and I looked at the distribution of tulip poplar, and it is found all over the state. It's just I'm not sure exactly where the weevil is most common. Like I said, I've been seeing more of an issues in the mountains, but I went outside on campus and found those very readily this year. I maybe haven't looked at many tulip poplars lately, and we have a couple in my yard, but they're fairly tall. So if you've seen it, looks like one person in Buncombe County. We haven't seen the extent of damage this season as we have before. Okay. All right. Allison, remind me which county you're in again? I'm drawing a blank. Yes, Nancy.
Matt, I'm putting the dot on for Wake County there.
Okay, yeah, of course, since I've seen it here. Okay, yep. So the mountains seem to be getting more of it, but yeah, we have it here in Wake. I'd be very curious to see if there's any on the coast. Would it be found in Southern Virginia? I think I'm going to stick with one for Tick and Appalachian Trail. Yes, they are found up and down the east. You know, like I said, in the mountainous areas, typically where tulip poplar is found. So they will be found in Virginia, Kentucky, and north. So yes, you would see them there. And they do look a lot like ticks, but just be sure, you know, they have that long proboscis. They look like a typical weevil, big eyes that almost touch. All right, well, it's good to know. But so if you see a lot of them, especially when they're emerging in the spring, aggregating or crawling on plants, again, they're only going to be a pest of tulip poplar typically, maybe magnolia. I've not seen any sassafras issues. Okay, Chatham County, yep, that makes sense. So it's a little west of Wake also. And so, again, year to year it seems to fluctuate. This year seems to be a bad year, though, based on the number of sightings and messages that I've been getting. All right, so that's for the yellow poplar, tulip tree weevil. And just keep your eyes out for it. Look for the damage. Again, it shouldn't really hurt the trees. All right, and the last insect I'm going to talk about is a very important one. Beauty of a beast, spotted lanternfly. So this is a fulgurid, which is a type of hopper, a plant hopper, called Lycorma delicatula. These are native to China and some close by countries. I'm going to put a link. Actually, let me grab. I've got a link about the tulip poplar weevil. I'm going to add. Okay, that's for the tulip poplar weevil. And then here's a good link for information on spotted lanternfly. But basically, native to Asia, and came into the U.S. in 2014 into Pennsylvania, of all areas. They're not really sure where it came from, although they think it might have been on rocks or construction equipment, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. These suck plant sap. They're actually phloem feeders, which is one of the main issues. You know, we have xylem feeders that don't really cause too much damage, but phloem has all the nutrients. It's really rich, and so phloem feeders are more of an issue. The other issue is that, especially as nymphs, they attack many types of plants. Almonds, apples, apricots, cherries, grapes, hops, maples, nectarines, oaks, peaches, pines, plums, poplar, sycamore, walnut, and willow, and more. I have grapes highlighted because adults will feed on grapes, but adults really prefer Tree of Heaven, Ailanthus altissima, and apparently need it to reproduce. Now, I know a lot of people, when I say that, say, oh, yay, now they can kill all the ailanthus, because people don't like it. It's a weed. It's considered a noxious weed in many areas. In fact, a lot of the recommendations for this pest are to cut down especially all female ailanthus in the area. use the male trees as traps for these insects and treat them with a systemic insecticide. Now, because this pest is so new, they're doing actually a lot of research up at Penn State. A very close friend and colleague of mine, Julie Urban up there, is leading the way. She's actually a fulguroid expert, and it happened to be that she went to Penn State and they have a fulguroid pest. So you can follow the link for some recommendations if you do find it. Now, it is only now, the furthest south it is in the northernmost county of Virginia, but because it can survive Pennsylvania winters, I suspect that it will be here, depending on the movement, within the next couple of years, unfortunately. So, some information about the life cycle. Well, first, it's a very beautiful pest. It's unfortunate for entomologists when we have these very beautiful insects that become pests because it's very conflicting. We don't have many fulgurids in the U.S., a few species in North Carolina that are very uncommonly seen. This one is a very pretty one. So just like the emerald ash borer, the Asian longhorn beetle, very beautiful but very destructive pests. So egg masses. This is where we think they came in. So the egg masses, you can see, are pretty disgusting looking. They start off as this wet, cement-looking substance, and underneath there are the individual eggs, and they dry on the trees. They think what happened is that rock and granite and things like that were brought in from China had some of these egg masses on them and were unseen, obviously, because they blend very well into that substrate. So that's one of the hypotheses of where we got them from. We've got these egg masses. They actually overwinter as eggs, so in the late fall is when the females will be producing these, and they will overwinter as eggs and hatch. When they hatch, the first 3 instars are going to be black and white, again, very pretty little insects, and very small. They've got a little weird nose, of course, no wings. And then when they're a later instar, the 4th instar and final instar, they get this really bright red, beautiful color. Again, very pretty insects. They're going to feed on a lot of different plants out there in the environment, the nymphs. They're not as restricted as the adults. Apparently, too, they earlier in the morning, they're going to be lower down on the plant, and as the day gets warmer, as the day gets later, they're going to start to climb up the tops of the plants. So luckily, these are very recognizable. If you see any of these or the adults, please let us or NCDA or somebody know that can communicate this issue. Now here's the adults. Again, this is in life. The adult is a very pretty insect. You can see this is why it's called the spotted lanternfly. They're called lanternflies, the group, because they used to think that their heads glowed, especially some of the species with very large heads. But what happens is these stick their stylets in the trees. They cause wounds to occur. It'll froth out. Sometimes they'll get infections, secondary infections. And unfortunately, it is a huge issue because there are very huge aggregations on trees. I've seen videos from my colleague in Pennsylvania of trees being swarmed by these insects. The industries like grape and orchard fruits are really worried about this insect because they do like hardwood, the trees, and they will aggregate. They do produce a lot of honeydew, which will then produce a lot of sooty mold. We're not exactly sure exactly all the effects of these insects on our agriculture and our plants, but we know that they are not going to be, it's not going to be good, net good. So we're still trying to figure out what's going to happen. There are areas that are quarantined. You don't want to move any wood or plant material from those areas in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia. I think Delaware has them. But basically, we're trying to stop this pest from moving, but it's very difficult with pests, as we know. All right, are there any questions?
Yeah, Mike, I didn't think to ask you this before in the times that we talked about this insect, but does it have any natural enemies?
So, actually, I was going to post a picture, a really funny thing, because I always stress about predatory stink bugs and how you shouldn't kill them. Well, there's a really cool photo on Bugwood with a predatory spine soldier bug eating one of these, so that's kind of cool. The predators will feed on them, but as you can see, there's so many of them that it doesn't really help. Each female can lay about 100 eggs, and so taking one female out can help reduce the population, but you can see how many there are. I was just at a camping trip / conference with a bunch of plant hopper, tree hopper people. They have people up at University of Delaware who work on fulguroids, and they have people actively rearing different plant hoppers, native plant hoppers, and exposing them to biological control agents to see if there are some that might be specific to spotted lanternfly and won't hurt our natural species. So as with all these, like brown marmorated stink bug, a couple other bugs, we're often looking for parasitoid wasps to help import and control these insects without hurting our natural, our native insects. It is still early, so we're not exactly sure. Even the effective chemical controls and cultural controls are still not known, but Pennsylvania is doing a lot of research on it right now because of the high populations there. They've been there for a little while now, and they have a lot of the types of agriculture that would be affected. So it is a good question. Any other questions about any of these insects before I move on to the bolo for this week, this month? All right, so bolo, June and August. Garden pests. So this is when they've already hatched. They're already starting to feed. This is when you're going to start to notice them more. So the hornworms, the parsley worms, squash borers, etc. A lot of the other garden pests, because the plants are very full of life, very vigorous, they are going to attract more pests. A lot of the wasps and hornets are going to be out and about, feeding their young, hunting for caterpillars, building their nests, trying to become big colonies, which will be the biggest at the end of the summer. Lots of pollinators, of course. The Japanese beetles are out, as with other scarabs. Very soon we will also be seeing the green June beetles flying around fields very fast. Cicadas are going to start to sing, coming out and emerge. We'll start to see them shedding their skins and emerging very soon, and get those summertime sounds of cicadas. Also, I have seen up in Delaware when I was there recently, actually last weekend, and in Maryland a couple weekends ago, the fall webworms are already starting up there, which I imagine then here they are in full swing right now, so look for those webs on the ends of branches for the webworms. And of course, it's summer, so there's so many other things that are out and about right now. And with that, I'll pass it over to Charlotte again.
All right. Thank you, Matt and Mike. That was excellent, as always. I just want to finish up with a couple of quick announcements. If you're not already on the Extension Master Gardener listserv, this is the list where I will be sending the follow-up information and where I send out announcements about things like plant specimen pathogens and other opportunities for Master Gardeners that happen at the state level. So please subscribe. There are also instructions for how to subscribe on NCSU Garden on the statewide part of the site. Just to save the date for October 3rd, the Western North Carolina Gardening Symposium will be held at Blue Ridge Community College in Flat Rock. So always a great event and a great time of the year to travel out west. There are some wonderful opportunities coming up for Master Gardeners to travel as part of the travel study program. This fall, you could go to Hawaii, September 23rd through the 30th. This is a trip that's in partnership with Virginia and Hawaii, Master Gardener volunteers. If you're interested in that, if you visit the site link, go.ncsu.edu/emgv-travel. You can learn more about that opportunity, as well as the opportunity to visit Costa Rica next year, February 28th through March 3rd. This is an amazing trip. I went earlier this year, and it is just an amazing country to visit, and the plants are truly just, you won't believe, things you've only ever seen as house plants. You can actually see them reach their full potential. And crops like palm and pineapple and, just an amazing array of things that are grown there. And then we will also have a trip to New Zealand, March 1st through 14th. Again, another country that's just amazing to visit. We will see a lot of gardens, public gardens, private gardens, visit a winery. We will go on a cruise on Doubtful Sound, which will be an overnight cruise. This will be a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful trip, so I hope some of you are able to join us for that. And then next time, we will be meeting on August 28th. For our guest speaker will be Dr. Bill Klein, who is our extension specialist for blueberries and muscadine grapes, and he will be talking about growing blueberries in North Carolina, especially in home gardens. So we hope you join us then. And just as a last reminder that you can find links to the recordings, which are usually posted about a week after one of our live events, if you go to go.ncsu.edu/PPP. That will take you to a page on the NC State Extension Gardening Portal. So thank you all for joining us and being with us today. And until we meet again, I wish you happy gardening.